Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Monday, February 19th. Happy Family Day to all our listeners out there. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. Jori, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Spring has sprung. I can hear the birds. Well, it's minus 7 degrees. I can't hear the birds chirping, but I can hear the Blue Jays chirping because we have pitchers and catchers reporting from Dunedin, Florida. And I don't know about you, but I'm very pleased to be able to say those words.
Yes, sir. They are back on the field. Very excited to see bullpen videos, BP videos, a little side interview videos that they always do. Of course, their first interviews of the season. Really excited. I mean, last time we talked, they were a couple days away, and now they're here. And there's been no shortage of news in the time since we last recorded. They, of course, obviously reported they started. The first full squad workout is tomorrow, but it seems like most of them are there already, getting things underway. So that's super exciting. And of course, two new additions to the team on non-roster invites, minor league contracts, Eduardo Escobar and Daniel Vogelbach.
Yes,
How are you?
Two nominees for the Greg Bird Award, but I'm not really quite sure either of them are going to be winning it. It seems like Vogelbach is in a better position to maybe make the team. Before we hit the record button, we pulled up Eduardo Escobar's StatCast page just because we hate ourselves a little bit. And I told you the exact words. If you want me to go on a rant, I'll go on a rant. And I'll tell you this. Eduardo Escobar brings nothing of value to this team. Not to come in flaming hot right off the top of the episode. Also, it's a minor league signing. I'm not going to get too worked up about a minor league signing. But like, what are we doing here? That's another middle infielder that doesn't play the middle infield. I don't know. I'm okay with Daniel Vogelbach. You know, he might slide in there instead of Spencer Horwitz. That might be nice. Still, just this team needs a third baseman, and it seems like their best answer to that trivia question was Eduardo Escobar, which is a little concerning.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit more. I think with the numbers and stuff. We're gonna try and project the Blue Jays opening day roster today. We'll do that. We'll get to that a little bit later. But just kind of looking at where Escobar stands, I mean, when you look at the roster that they have, it seems like he's kind of directly in competition with the likes of like a Davis Schneider, Santiago Espinal, Ernie Clement for kind of like one of these last roster spots. And I thought it was really interesting. Sportsnet's Shai Davidi wrote yesterday that Escobar presumably has some assurances about making the roster. So, like, obviously he's a veteran, right? So he's probably looking for somewhere where he would have a good chance of making the major league roster. So if that is actually the case, then I really don't quite get the deal if they're bringing him in with the intention of him being one of these final roster spots. I mean, I get it. Like, how many at bats would he see over the course of the year? And I guess he hits lefties well. I mean, last year he had a 108 WRC plus against them and like slashed relatively okay. He doesn't walk, and obviously like the power totally disappeared last year. And
There's no redeeming qualities really to adding him. And if I may, I would say it's a negative because he's in the way of a guy like Barger and a guy like Martinez. So what's the point of bringing in another guy like him when you have 5,000 middle infielders as it is? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Again, minor league signing. I'm not going to get too worked up about this. You want me to get worked up, maybe, bring in someone of more substantial significance. But I just don't see what possible benefit to having this guy being assured a major league roster spot even is.
Yeah, I like it's so like you think about it, right? You're like, like bring him in for some competition. He's a veteran, whatever. You let him go, no cost, whatever. And if it felt like they were gonna let him go, then I would probably like we'd probably be done talking about it already. But to me, it almost feels like he has a like is trending towards having a spot on the team just based on what Shai wrote. I mean,
Yeah.
like he's a fairly informed insider with the team and him saying that if he likely has assurances of making the team, like he would have to have a dismal spring to get let go, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, again, and not to keep bringing Greg Bird up, but I mean, you think about the spring that he had, and he seemed like he was going to make the team and didn't. So to assure Escobar a spot to me is nothing short of perplexing. he looks like a guy that's poised for like a sub 600 OPS. He doesn't walk anymore, as you said, so I'm not really sure what the plan is with the stick and with the glove. He's not good defensively, and there's no spot for him. I guess you're hoping for some positive regression. He's 35. What positive regression could there possibly be?
Yeah, I mean, he seems like he's like one of these guys who like flip flops good and bad seasons. I mean, I guess before last year he had been pretty solid. He's like 117 WRC plus in 2018, 35 homers, 108 WRC plus in 2019, and then 2020 like he had 200 plate appearances. So like sample size, right? He had 56 WRC plus if you're counting, and then 108, 104 in 2022, and last year he said it in Shy's piece where he's like, it was just kind of weird, like not having a spot in the lineup every day and not really knowing when you're going to play. So maybe it's
But
it's
that's
just
going to
a
be the
thing
case
where
again
they,
this year. He's not going to have a
yeah.
spot this year.
I mean, at least though, so the way that I would look at it, if he does make the roster, is that he would be getting the bulk of the at bats against left-handed pitching, right? So at least he would know that he's coming in to do that. And we can get into it a little bit further when we talk about the roster, but just kind of comparing him to the guys kind of in that situation. I mean, I'm just gonna kind of highlight Santiago Espinal. I mean, like, do you think that comparing the two, who would you take today without seeing their spring performances yet?
Espinal. It doesn't even matter to me what his spring is because Espinal will play shortstop for you. Maybe he's not the best shortstop. He obviously had a down year last year, but I don't really see any reason to believe that he can't be a valuable defender in some capacity. Escobar is barely a passable third baseman.
Yeah, I mean, Espinal is more than likely a better third baseman, and more like he's almost definitely a better just defender all across the infield. But if you're looking at it, I mean, they brought in IKF to kind of have that, right? Like where he can kind of be the backup shortstop and handle the bulk of the defensive innings at third base. So maybe they are giving Escobar the chance to kind of be that lefty masher because Espinal, who came into last year being that, right? Like they had him as their starting second baseman against lefties, and he proceeded last year to not hit lefties at all.
No.
He had a 81 WRC plus, or sorry, an 80 WRC plus against lefties. And, it wasn't a great year from him all around. So it's tough to say. Maybe it is actually going to be a spring battle. Like it feels like there hasn't been one of those, a real spring battle in a couple years for the Jays. So maybe it's actually going to be, hey, can Santiago like return to form as like a 138 WRC bat, 138 WRC plus bat against lefties as he was in 22, or is Escobar's pop a little bit more valuable off the bench or potential pop, I guess in that
Yeah,
case.
but does that pop even exist anymore? Is the question. I mean, it certainly wasn't there last year, and I don't really see any reason to believe that it would be this year. You look at all of his hard hit numbers. There's nothing really particularly redeeming about this guy.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, like it's we'll see. We'll see. It's so early and we just spent like probably way too much time talking about this guy. Um the one that's actually more interesting anyways is Vogelbach. Like
Yes.
he's actually probably going to make the team. And for him, like it seems like he's coming into battle Spencer Horwitz for that last roster spot, right? And Vogelbach, he's a big boy, hits long home runs sometimes. And if, we talk about it on the pod all the time, how like, especially me, being a big fan of taking, kind of having like that elite play discipline. And he's one of those guys where it's like he just doesn't swing. Um, but as far like he had a 119 WRC plus against righties last year, so he's kind of have a decent chance. And I mean, if you think about like comparing him to Horowitz, right? Like Horowitz, elite hit tool, elite command of the strike zone, but kind of lacks a little bit of that juice, right? So Vogelbach comes in like not exactly the same hit tool, but same command of the strike zone, but is actually hitting the baseball with force.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it is where like you look at the two and you feel like you're gonna get probably similar walk numbers out of the two, and you just want a little bit of extra power where
Well,
Vogelbach will
it's
come in.
to me, it's got to be something kind of in the mold of you're looking at a prototypical first baseman versus a more not even unique, but just a guy that doesn't generally fit the mold. He kind of plays the corners as well, but the Blue Jays have, in terms of outfield depth, they have enough there that they should be largely okay. Horowitz's ability to play a half decent corner outfield probably has a little bit of value, but not that much. And then it's really just a question of you're looking for power versus contact ability, right? And realistically, it doesn't super matter how they get on as long as they kind of get on, at least in my view. There's valuation differences, of course. It's better to be a power hitter realistically. But if Horwitz is going to be the better hitter between the two, I wouldn't be shocked. Like, you could come to me on June 1st or July 1st, and I would hear you out if either guy was the better hitter. I think it's totally plausible. I think that it's possible that Horwitz could be maybe like a 280, 340, 420 maybe guy, something like that. I think that's totally plausible. Just as I would say it's plausible for Vogelbach to be a 350, 450 type guy or 350, 480 guy in terms of on base and slugging. Just with regards to what they bring and that they both are capable of having competitive good seasons.
Yeah.
To me, it's that is a better ad and it's a more compelling ad just because it gives you competition at a position that you already have depth at versus you know third base where you have depth but you don't have a guy.
Yeah. I mean, like just to kind of like put the numbers head to head a little bit as far as like quality of contact goes. Like Vogelbach average exit velocity 91.7, Horwitz 87. And of course, that's like a very small sample size. Of course, that's only 27 batted balls for him. As far as like max EV goes, like Horwitz only got to 100, 103 and a half in his time in the majors, and Vogelbach was 112.6. Ex Woba wise, Vogelbach's like 0.323. Horwitz was sub 300. So, I totally get the move, and I think that it's actually kind of nice to see them potentially prioritize um a guy who's going to hit the ball out of the yard
Yeah.
compared to like a guy who's going to put the ball in play.
Yeah. There's value obviously in both, but I think a lot of people have been screaming for some power. And it would be nice if Vogelbach could have a good season, particularly better than his 2020 with the Blue Jays.
His 2020 season where he played for three separate teams.
Yes. Old friend, but I think we're trying to maybe forget that first stint.
Yeah. I mean, so just going to look at like Zip's projections here. Like Zip's So putting Horwitz with a 507 plate appearance projection is a little bold to me, but they have him 255, 343, 384 slug, 105 WRC plus, 9 home runs, 10.8% walk rate, 18.3% K rate. And then Vogelbach, Zips has him 364 plate appearances, 108 WRC plus, 225 average, 343 OBP, 394 slug, 15% walk rate, 25% K rate, 13
Lower
home
slug
runs.
than I thought it would be.
Yeah, they did kind of hammer him a little bit there. That's actually the lowest of any projection system.
Really.
So I would say it probably trends a little bit higher. And to me, also like the takeaway from that is like they're both obviously like different hitters, but you're probably in the end you're probably getting a similar amount of contributions from either one.
Yeah. And then it just becomes a question of does Vogelbach's additional defensive
Limitations.
deficiencies make your decision any different. And also worth noting is that Horwitz has options. I'm assuming because he's not a recent add to the 40 man, is he? Or rather, he is a more recent add to the 40 man.
He still has two options.
So I mean, there's nothing really wrong to me with stashing Horwitz in AAA and having him come up after an injury or two or
Yeah.
three.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's, one thing that we haven't talked about is, do these moves increase the likelihood of a trade? It seems like it. Atkins day one,
Well,
he said that any addition would likely come as a subtraction, which to me hints at like we're done big game hunting in free agency, but if we are going to make a significant add, it's going to be through a trade.
which would be fair. I mean, Jays have been very quiet this offseason, in particular relative to last off seasons. We all obviously know how things went down with Otani and whatnot, but I wouldn't be opposed to a trade. I just don't see who it could possibly be other than like Espinal, unless you want to sell high on Davis Schneider, which in terms of the fan base's approval ratings certainly would cause some more additional problems.
Yeah. Well,
So
I mean,
I don't know.
yeah, like I think the Espinal trade kind of makes sense. I don't know what you're getting from him or for him. Obviously there's been a ton of floating like the Austin Slater for Espinal trade, but since you traded Otto Lopez to the Giants, like do they really need Espinal in that case? I mean, if you look at it too, if you decide like it might be a later in spring trade after you kind of decide where your roster is going to go, because Mitch White doesn't have any options, Ernie Clement doesn't have any options, and those are two guys that I think could realistically get claimed if you do try to send them to AAA.
I could see White getting claimed just because there's no such thing as too much pitching depth. But at the same time, there's going to be guys on waivers that I'm sure the Jays will maybe take a nip at or two. Clement, I would be less concerned with him getting claimed, and maybe there's a correlation there in terms of if Clement does get claimed, that's where having Escobar and his inability to play shortstop, but ability to play third in a very broad sense makes him more valuable. But still,
I
there's so much depth up the middle that I just struggle to see where that kind of fit is.
I mean with Clement specifically, like I actually think he's a really good fit for the roster as a bench piece. Like he's the best defensive shortstop that they have on the roster. He's one of the fastest players they have on the roster, which are two things that you don't really have on the bench right now, right? Like a quality defensive shortstop and a fast guy. So like I mean like that's a little specific as to like him making the roster. Like I don't know if he has a spot as of right now. We'll get into it, but what the team really doesn't have is kind of like that fourth outfielder. And is it just going to be the fourth outfield spot is split between Biggio, Schneider, IKF, Horwitz if he makes the team, Barger if he makes the team, kind of thing?
It kind of seems like it, and then your backup center fielder is your left fielder in Varsho, and if Varsho's out, then you don't have a backup center fielder.
Well, I mean the guy in right field spent a couple years in center field.
That's a good point too. There's a lot of there's that's one thing I will give plenty of credit to, and I don't think that there's any kind of not like disillusion, but disagreement is that this front office has done a good job with positional versatility. They've gone out and very explicitly
They've done
stated
a
that's what they
great
want.
job with personal or positional versatility.
I don't know how many positional versatility championships are won, but the ability to shuffle guys around is a nice luxury for Schneider and Co. But there's limits, of course, to that, and adding Eduardo Escobar that plays two positions, both of them very poorly, doesn't really fit with the rest of the theming there.
Yeah, I think that sometimes positional versatility versus positional versatility where players can play multiple positions well gets thrown out of the way, right? Like there's a big difference between being able to play multiple positions and being able to play them well.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's interesting like as far as what Atkins said, and also like IKF played a lot of center for the Yankees last year. So I guess if you look at it that way, like they have a lot of fourth outfielders, if you want to call them that, in their infield.
which is fine. Just the problem is who's hitting the baseball this year,
Wow.
which has been the discussion for
Yeah.
the entire winter.
Yeah. As far as like we can kind of move on from those two additions to like some of the actual um team related news, which I wouldn't say that there's like any specific news, but just like things that we can probably draw from the first couple days of camp. Yariel Rodriguez reported he he looks a lot older than 26, I'll say. Ricky Tiedemann's up to 96 in his first, or was up to 96 in his first live ABs of the spring. Alec Manoah looks good. Sounds like he's saying all the right things. I thought he sounded really mature in his availability. It seemed like he
Yeah,
kind of like obviously like he admitted that last year didn't really go all that well. Or that's understatement of the year. But just like it sounded like he made a lot of really good adjustments, and I thought it sounded a lot different than what he was saying kind of after starts last year.
I think there's a bit of a perception with Manoa that he's got a bit of Marcus Stroman in him, and he does. Like, he's got a swagger about him, but I don't necessarily think that he's quite the same character. And kind of the way that Marcus Stroman kind of was very adversarial at times with the media and so forth. I think Manoa, generally speaking, is a lot more cordial in a lot of ways, and I think the maturity there also, to me, it seemed like he was very forthright in his availability. There was that one quote that got a little misconstrued. He kind of went, "They don't give out World Series trophies in AAA," but I don't take much umbrage with that. I think that, to me, this desire to be competitive, something that Ross Atkins himself has repeatedly said that we're really happy with, that he
Yeah.
hasn't lost that edge to him, even if he's had a down year. To me, that's still encouraging.
No, like yeah, I'm glad that you pointed out that quote because I didn't have it written down or anything, but like he was just saying that he wants to be on the major league roster because he's here to compete for World Series, right? Like
Yeah,
it's like I don't get why it kind of got taken out the way that it did, but no, really impressed with what he said. Are you worried at all about Ricky Tiedemann being at 96 out of the gate?
I probably should be, but I mean, it's kind of fun to have a guy that's a lefty throw a 96. So I'll leave my worry for when his arm starts to jangle a little loose. But until such point, I'll just ride the high, and I eagerly await his first triple digit fastball of spring.
So one thing that like we haven't touched on is like the everybody in Jay's camp is just jacked this year. They're like, like Ricky T's added 25 pounds of muscle. Manoa's down 30 pounds. Vladdy's looking great. Even in the Eduardo Escobar article, they're like, oh, he dropped a bunch of weight over the offseason. It
Yeah,
is quite literally,
your 2024 Blue Jays presented by Weight Watchers.
it is quite literally like best shape of your life season for everybody at Jay's camp. It's crazy. Just the even like like I mean obviously this is just me like looking at pictures. Like I thought Bo looked really good. Um, it's love this time of year I guess for all the guys to come into camp
Op-
after their off season workouts.
no, optimism reigns supreme at this time of year. There's really no doubt about that. But I do think it's important that these guys are coming in and they look good. I think that a lot of it is narrative based, because you think about a guy like Big Poppy back in the 2000s, not exactly a stick, but he certainly hit the ball well. And you think of, I mean, there's other guys that maybe had a little bit of a well balanced breakfast involved in their process, but I think of the same team. Manny Ramirez was a big dude for maybe other reasons, but like, you don't have to be a stick to be uh, a competitive ball player, right? Even
No,
Manoa was really good in 2022, and to me, he
no.
looks like he's smaller than he was during his Cy Young finalist season. So I think more than anything, uh, the weight stuff just kind of allays fears of these guys not being in great shape.
Yeah, like you're right. Like the weight thing, like how much of an impact does it have on the field? Like we'll see. But to me, at least it shows that they cared this offseason, right? And obviously they're professional baseball players and it's their job to care and take it seriously. Obviously we got some news of some major league players that maybe don't quite care as much today. Anthony Rendon, that was super fun quotes from
An
him this morning.
insane quote. That guy is just here for the paycheck.
Yes. And he got it, so now he doesn't care anymore. Anyways, it shows that they care and they're taking this year seriously, and I think that's obviously what you want as a fan. You want them to come in and care about the team and the product that they put on the field.
Yeah, no, I'd much rather have a guy like a Vlad or an Manoa with this competitive spirit talking about wanting to win a World Series than, Tony 2 weeks vacation, you know?
Oh, what happened to him, man? It's just crazy. It's crazy. And any other takeaways from the pitchers for you? I mean, like
Well, I
Manoa, Ricky
saw one
T.
thing. I saw one thing today about Kevin Gosman trying to locate his pitches up and down in the zone, which I thought
Mhm.
was really
Yeah,
fascinating.
you saw the strings.
Yeah, which high tech, high performance, but still interesting because
Yeah.
there was a lot of talk last year that up in the zone's fastball, down in the zone was a splitter. So I think the continued honing of that, because I recall last year as well, they talked about him changing up his pitch mix and trying to work a little bit more up and down with both of the pitches. To me, the biggest thing for him is just going to be continuing to just, I mean, he's an ace in every sense of the word, right? There's really nothing you could say about Kevin Gosman that hasn't been said already in terms of how electric he is. But I do still think it's really interesting that they have really honed in with him on this being able to disguise each pitch when they're up and down in the zone.
Yeah. I mean, as long as maybe he just has to change what he does against the Minnesota Twins, and then he'll be all right.
Seems like it.
Talking about switching pitch mixes though, Nate Pearson working on a splitter. Very intriguing. We love new pitch season, but in this case, I find it hard to really get worked up about it because for him, it's all about the fastball, right? Like he's throwing hard. He doesn't get a ton of whiffs with the fastball, which to me is a big problem. Obviously, like the command is also an issue at like a 93 location plus last year. And d- are you happy that he's adding a new splitter? Are you intrigued by it?
I'd be lying if I wasn't intrigued. I think you're a lot cooler on it than I am, and you retweeted something the other day about it, kind of basically saying that splitters are good for guys that need an out pitch. He has an out pitch. He's got a slider. His problem is he can't locate the fastball. But to me, it could kind of be signaling a bit of a change in approach there. And I also wonder, because it'd be adding a third pitch. I wonder if he's a distant third, but I wonder if this is something like, hey, like, don't forget about me. I came up as a starter. I'm going to add a third pitch. Maybe I can be in the rotation still. I don't know if that's necessarily realistic, but to me, the third pitch, excuse me, I just don't know what, I just know what it would add, because he has his slider, which plays well off his fastball. The problem is that his fastball is just doesn't, like, he rears back and lets it fly, but the problem is that it's maybe in the zone, maybe not in the zone, and if a guy just sits and waits and sits and waits and sits and waits, eventually he's going to get one that he's going to be able to hammer. So the splitter could be useful, but I just struggle to see its utility.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like Pearson's heat maps on Baseball Savant, like the fastball, he actually threw the fastball like in the zone a decent amount. It's just not quality location, right? He's kind of like leaving
A
it to get
lot,
hit,
yeah.
right? Like where if you look at like his Baseball Savant heat map, the fastball isn't at the top of the zone, which you want, right? Like it's kind of creeps down a little bit, and like a splitter isn't a pitch that you throw for a strike. So for him, like to me, it's he needs to be able to locate that fastball at the top of the zone a little bit better. He needs to be able to kind of get that slider and curveball off the plate a little bit better. And then like if he's throwing a splitter, if he can, it's kind of like Kevin Gausman stuff, right? Where it's like if he can kind of locate the fastball at the bottom of the zone a little bit better too. It'd be big because then if you're locating the splitter at the bottom, or sorry, the fastball at the bottom of the zone, hitters are going to have to start to swing at that. And if he can disguise the splitter well, then hitters are going to swing at that when it's not a strike, but it's all dependent on throwing strikes anyways, because if hitters see his fastball and it's coming in at the top, like not at the top of the zone, like a little bit lower kind of letters to belt, and they can tell that's going to be a strike, right? And then
Yeah.
anything below that, you can be like, well, he's because he doesn't throw his fastball at the bottom of the zone very much. So if he's throwing a splitter there, you're just not going to swing at it.
Now, here's a question for you. Is there any way that he just goes full Kevin Gosman and ditches the slider in its entirety and instead becomes a fastball splitter guy? Because maybe he looks at like a Eric Swanson, who is another guy with a similar build to Gosman, that he uses the fastball and the splitter as is basically the pitch that he generates a lot of the whiffs on. So could that be something where Pearson just changes his approach and moves away from the slider because he feels that he can't elevate his fastball to a point where he can use it in a competitive fashion? I mean, this is just mostly spitballing.
I it's funny because like when I read the news that Pearson was looking at adding a splitter, I kind of looked at Gosman's stuff just to kind of see what he did as he developed the splitter, right? So if you look at his pitch mix, like his splitter took the kind of a significant jump like in the 2018, 2019 range. And yeah, like you mentioned, like he got rid of the slider, which he's actually brought back a little bit in the past couple of years,
Yeah.
which is pretty interesting. Um, but the one thing like with Nate is like he was really successful at the beginning of the year last year. Like you remember, like he was kind of circle of trust, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that he kind of has like a guidebook to what he needs to do to be successful, and it's just going to be about him finding a way to locate that fastball a little bit. And like it's hard for me to say whether or not he could ditch a slider. Like to me, I feel like the fastball and slider are a good combo for him to be successful. And like I actually like his curveball as well. Um, it's just really inconsistent location wise.
Yeah, but that's the story with him in all facets. I don't know. Nate Pearson is such an interesting kind of, you're out on him and you're in on him and you're out on him and you're in on him. Right now, he's definitely on the kind of out on him side of that meter. But anytime you have a guy that throws triple digits, like it's so hard to not just salivate, right? That's
Yeah,
why he was so enticing coming up as a prospect.
yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, he's fighting for a roster spot, right? Like I think if I had to put together a bullpen for opening day, which we'll do in a couple minutes here, I don't know if he's in my opening day bullpen.
It's tough to see a spot for him. They have a lot of arms.
I'm curious. I'm just gonna pull up his AAA stats from last year because I know he down the stretch last year at AAA like had some pretty significant improvements. Let me just pull it up here. Let me pull it up here. Love this part of podcasting where you search up stats. Um,
This statistics break brought to you by the letter S for stalling. Before you
uh,
do jump in, uh, and I'll let you continue to search, but with Pearson, I think also what is so interesting about him is that like he's getting up there in age almost. I say that as a guy that's 3 years younger than him, but uh, but I mean he turns 28 during the season this year. he, he's getting into Julian Merriweather territory. Now, mind you, Julian Merriweather has turned himself around and has become a really valuable part of the Chicago Cubs bullpen. And maybe that's a blueprint that he can look to follow as well. So I don't think that Pearson's necessarily done by any means, but he's definitely behind the eight ball in terms of where he is and where he could be.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I got the stats up here. So after he got sent down to AAA end of July, his first like six outings, he walked 10 hitters in those six outings. And then after that, so kind of his last outing in August through the middle of September, he didn't walk a single hitter and only gave up 3 hits in that time. So
So he
so
found
I'm
something
curious to
there.
see if there is something that he kind of found in the way that he turned it around. I mean, also the K numbers looked pretty good in that stretch as well, where he struck out. Let me just get it here. He struck out, 8 hitters in those 5 appearances or
Yeah.
six,
Nate
six.
Pearson, Nate Pearson is not a finished product. I don't think that anybody thinks that he is. And I think for the most part, there really aren't very many guys on the Blue Jays I would describe as finished products.
Yeah,
But I also don't really know. how much time Pearson has to figure things out.
I think it'd be interesting for him to start the year in AAA as almost like their closer, and then we hate closers on this podcast, but like if he starts as closer there and can at least prove that some of that stuff has stuck, it'd be nice for them to be able to bring him back up after that when there's inevitably a bullpen injury or something that takes him out of the mix for, or sorry, that allows him to come up to the Jays.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned him maybe closing, maybe some high leverage would be good for him. But I like there is a path for him to return to the Blue Jays. I don't really think that's so much in question, especially given the volatility of relievers. I just wonder if you're him as well. At a certain point, are you kind of like maybe I need a different voice? He he might not be the storyline of camp, but I mean, given how much we've talked about him, he's one of the more intriguing arms that you
Yeah,
can kind of see on the team, right? Just because of the tantalizing potential and the excruciating lack of results.
he like you talk about Julian or Merriweather, but he would be a guy that I would be terrified of letting go into another organization.
Exactly. No, exactly that.
You imagine like he gets picked up by the Rays or something like,
It's yeah,
yeah,
forget about it.
yeah.
He's a 40 save. Well, they don't use closers either, but he's a lockdown Eric Gagne type.
He's Jordan Hicks. All right. Well, I think that's kind of most of the news pitching wise. Obviously, like we'll get more in the coming days, unless you have any Yariel Rodriguez takes other than him showing up.
Yariel Rodriguez. I don't have any particular takes. I did see Scotty Mitchell mention Yariel Rodriguez future closer, which obviously gets me very excited, but on no discernible basis. So I mean, nice to have another arm. We kind of talked about him a little bit a
Yeah,
couple weeks back about when they signed him. I think we'll get a better feel for him during spring training and exactly what he brings to the table.
I think he's his baseball savant page during spring training might be like one of the most viewed in all of baseball. It's
He's
going to
going
be
to
crazy.
have the number one viewed page. The second most viewed page will be Shohei Otani's.
Well, he's missing their spring training opening day, so
Trouble in
yeah,
paradise?
does that mean anything? Not really.
No, probably not.
Um, Outside of the pitchers, like we haven't really heard from many of the hitters other than Danny Jansen. Obviously, that makes sense, pitchers and catchers, right? I don't think he said too much that was interesting. He said that he has had extension talks with the Jays, that he's not closing any doors, but he's focused on the season. As most players say, where you know,
Mhm.
they're focusing on the season, blah blah blah. It's notable that it sounds like he doesn't have like a drop dead date for negotiations, where
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of players will, say, I'm just gonna focus on the season once it starts.
Yeah. These things can change with one phone call. It's always been the case. I wouldn't read too much into him saying that, nothing has really progressed. I am intrigued because if I recall correctly, the aforementioned Scotty Mitchell sat down with him and they said that they had not had any meaningful
Yeah.
discussions. So at least at this point, you know that there's some talk, there's some mutual interest. And I wouldn't be shocked if this does get done, not based on any insider knowledge, just based on the Blue Jays' need for a catcher, because it's Alejandro Kirk and his band of merry nobodies. So it seems like it has to be Jansen or it has to be somebody. Now, maybe they do go into the offseason and he leaves and they look elsewhere, or they go external or they sign someone. But to me, Jansen just seems like a very obvious candidate to be your guy. Or maybe even in some cases you're looking at Kirk and you're kind of like, if he can be a guy, we don't need Jansen. So I think that for the Blue Jays, the incentive isn't really there to rush to a deal. But I also think they should maybe prioritize it a little bit more than how much they have.
Yeah, it's very interesting like what they'll do there, because like he's obviously a very well liked guy. He's a fan favorite. All the pitchers, love him. And I thought the Shy's piece on Jansen was super interesting as well, where Jansen's like, like I get this is like I guess Jansen didn't exactly say this, but it kind of sounded like where he's like, I understand like all the catching numbers that are out right now with Savant having like blocking, framing, throwing stats, but it's like relationships are super important and like game calling and stuff like that, like stuff you can't quantify. And I understand like when we as a baseball community are like, well, this guy isn't a good catcher because he doesn't frame well, because he doesn't block well, whatever. But I do think that relationship building and game calling is something that, we'll never be able to quantify, right? So how can you ever measure it? But I do think that it's a super valuable aspect of catching and something that I wish was a little bit more prevalent when talking about catchers defensively.
Yeah, I don't necessarily get the impression that Jansen is this untouchable, game master general game
Well,
caller or
yeah.
anything necessarily. I mean, certainly you think about a guy like a Russell Martin back in the mid 2010s, and you heard all about this. He's a future manager. He's a future manager. He's a future manager. You don't hear that in the same way that you hear that about Jansen. He's also dramatically younger than when Russell Martin was in Toronto. But it's something to consider, the relationships, especially that he knows all the pitchers,
Yeah.
and there's a built-in familiarity. How long that familiarity takes to build obviously is also subject to debate, because maybe a guy spends a spring training in Toronto and he's up to speed. But I do think that there's value in Jansen being a guy that's been here so long that has a relationship with every pitcher, basically.
Yeah. As far as like extension talks go, like the Jays don't really have a ton of options, like who's the third catcher right now on the roster. It's like Dalton Varsho or Isaiah Kiner-Falefa.
Yeah, it's not
Um,
really anybody notable.
they do have six catchers in camp, which is also pretty interesting, I think, where they have like Max McDowell, Phil Clark, Zach Britton, Brian Servin, Andres Sosa, and Peyton Henry. I think Servin is most likely to be, because he has like major league experience, to kind of be that option, like if Jansen or Kirk were to get hurt, as the guy who would be first to get called up. But yeah, it's interesting. We'll see where they all fall. Like it's as far as like niche spring training things to watch, that group of six catchers is like perhaps
The
one of the
nichest
most,
of niche.
yes, for the Blue Jays' potential future of catching or what might happen given an
Yeah,
injury or whatever, right?
yeah, yeah.
With all that though, let's get to our roster projections on February 19th for the opening day roster. Um, so I guess what we can do, let's before we kind of debate a little bit, let's get to the guys that we all agree on. So what we'll do is we'll do, 13 pitchers, 13 position players. I'm gonna run through guys and you tell me yes or no if you agree that they are a lock to be on the opening day roster.
Yes, and I get the sense we'll get a lot of overlap here.
Yes. All right. Kevin Gossman,
On the team.
Chris Bassett,
On the team.
Jose Barrios,
On the team.
Yusei Kikuchi.
On the team.
All right. So I'm gonna leave those four as our preliminary rotation, and we can come back to it. Bullpen, tell me if you disagree with this group. Jordan Romano, Eric Swanson, Tim Meza, Jimmy Garcia, Chad Green, Yenesis Cabrera.
That seems like five guys that'll definitely make it and gives you room for about three more dudes.
Yes, so that is 10 pitchers that we got. Let's just stick pitchers. So the other guys who I think are in contention to be on the Blue Jays opening day roster: Alek Manoah, Bowden Francis, Mitch White, Yariel Rodriguez, Trevor Richards, Zach Pop, and Nate Pearson. So we need one more starter and two more bullpen pieces.
So I'm thinking for the starter at this point in time, based on the early returns in spring, all the narratives, everything, it sounds like Alek Manoah.
Yes.
Now, Yariel Rodriguez also sounds like he is a starter. He sounds like he's being treated as a starter. It sounds like they're stretching him out. It sounds like they're giving him a go. He obviously has options, so there's the choice to put him in AAA. But I think, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Blue Jays would almost prefer that Rodriguez forces their hand and has to be part of the rotation, in which case that would be at the expense of Alek Manoah. So right now, I will say Alek Manoah, but I could see a universe where Yario Rodriguez has just such electric stuff that he has to be part of the rotation, and Alek Manoah ends up in AAA. Mitch White, as mentioned, is out of options, and we will see you in Colorado.
So okay, so I agree with you. I'm picking Manoa to be my fifth starter in the rotation. As far as the Mitch White being out of options, like, do you remember last year where like nobody wanted Mitch White on the opening day roster and he ended up being on it?
Oh, I don't like that you've brought that up because now I'm
So
thinking about if that happens.
here's what I'm thinking. I think that there's a decent chance where, of course, there's been the talk that they've stretched out Bowden Francis as a starter, right? So he Francis also has one option left. I wonder if they start Manoa with the on the opening day roster as your fifth starter. You have Mitch White be your long man. You send Yariel and Bowden back down to Buffalo and let them continue to stretch out as starters. Potentially, if you need them to fill the Alek Manoa role or to come up and be a long man in case Mitch White doesn't quite work up or his gains from last year in AAA also do not hold up. So you bring in Mitch White as your long man, Alek Manoah as your five, and then you have two more bullpen spots left, which to me um, seems like it's going to be would that be a Trevor Richards and Nate Pearson situation?
I think Trevor Richards gets a shot. He obviously completely crumbled at the seams at the end of the year. There was talk that he might get non-tendered. Uh, I think you give him a spot, and right now he just doesn't have circle of trust privileges. And then I think your last guy, you know what? I'm gonna go off the board here. I am a Zach Pop believer. I continue to be a Zach Pop believer. And I could see Zach Pop getting a shot at making this opening day roster, and I think he could be the guy.
That's an interesting take. I mean, obviously, like he's the Blue Jays bullpen at the beginning of last year was crazy. Like Nate Pearson was in the circle of trust, Zach Pop was really good to start, and then he obviously struggled a little bit, got hurt, went down to AAA, and wasn't very good. So I he also only has one option too, so it's kind of interesting to see what'll happen there. Um, to me, I so for me in my pitching rotation for the Blue Jays, I go Manoa and then send Yariel down. Mitch White is the long man. Have Richards, and then that last bullpen spot comes down to Bowden Francis versus Nate Pearson. And to me that's tough because then you like are you gonna have two long men? Like I don't see why not because Francis was so good last year. But to me it feels like that's probably a spring thing that they figure out.
But does Bowden Francis have value to you as a bullpen arm and just a pure bullpen arm? Because I don't think he does.
Um in a non-Mitch White world, he does. Like in the world where Mitch White is sent down to AAA, Bowden
In a world where
Francis.
Mitch White is playing for the Miami Marlins.
Yeah, yeah, right. Like where Mitch White is not on the Toronto Blue Jays. Having Bowden Francis as an insurance for Manoa early in the season, I think is something valuable, right? Like if Manoa doesn't quite have it this year, or like I mean, obviously they have a couple starters on the roster who weren't very good in 2022 and were very good in 2023, right? So depending on how you feel about what happens in 2024, obviously you expect them to still perform well, but having Francis as an insurance for them maybe having a slip up or kind of anything to go wrong, I feel more confident in Bound Francis as a pitcher than Mitch White. I just think that the option situation is going to force them to keep White in that role and see what he has. And I'll throw him into that group of like Francis, White, and Pearson battling like three guys for two spots in spring, basically.
Is there any way that it's almost the opposite where you think you can sneak him through during the roster crunch? Whereas if you hold on to
Yeah.
him and you send him down during late April, early May because he's got a 6 ERA in 6 appearances and some other team snaps him up.
That's a good point. I mean, we've seen him get DFA'd and not get claimed, right? So it's happened before. I just wonder how much his like end of the year in AAA would entice some teams to tossing him on their roster.
seems plausible, but I just wonder how legit he is versus
Yeah,
once games have started and
you're
people will
probably right.
start to fall. That's when I feel like you're more likely to have him get claimed.
You're probably right that it makes more sense for you to try and slip him through now when a bunch of guys are going through and teams are probably enamored with their own guys, right? Like if I'm God, name a team, right?
Calgary Flames.
If I'm the Calgary Flames and I'm in love with what Martin Pospisil is bringing me right now, I don't need to try out Mitch White.
Exactly.
Um, all right, all right, we'll have an official bird's eye view 26-man roster on February 19th. Gossman, Bassett, Barrios, Kikuchi, Manoah as your starting rotation. Bullpen, Romano, Swanson, Richards, Meza, Garcia, Green, Cabrera. And that is 13.
And let's get the sticks
Did I do
going.
my math wrong? I think I did my math wrong there. 1, 2, 3,
Uh-oh.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12. Okay, so we have one more spot left. So who is your last bullpen piece?
Last bullpen piece. I get to add a free bullpen piece just for funsies.
I'll let you make the official decision, and it's between Francis, White, and Pearson, and there's no long man in the bullpen unless you consider Trevor Richards a long man.
It's between those three guys.
Between those three, unless you want to put Yariel on there, but I
I
think that
know.
we
To me, Yariel ends up in
yeah.
AAA.
Unless you want to put Zach Pop on too. I guess you can I'll give you your other 40-man roster options are Hagen Danner, Brendan Little, Adam Mako, Wes Parsons, and Yosfer Zulueta.
I would say none of those guys are on the major league roster, barring something unforeseen. As much as it would be really awesome to see some of those guys up, no, I think you're probably on the right track. I think we're looking at Mitch White is probably there, and maybe Pearson, but just we'll see what Pearson has this spring.
Yeah. All right. Well, that locks in our 13-man pitching staff. Let's move over to the position player side of things. We'll do it again. I'll just hit you with some of the guys who we know are going to be on the roster. Alejandro Kirk, Danny Jansen, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Bo Bichette, George Springer, Kevin Kiermaier, Dalton Varsho, Justin Turner.
9 dudes.
9. So we have 4 left. So that group of other players includes Santiago Espinal, Kevin Biggio. Actually, we'll throw Kevin Biggio in that group.
We'll give Kevin Biggio the respect he deserves.
So 3 spots for Santiago Espinal, Davis Schneider, Spencer Horwitz, Orelvis Martinez, Addison Barger, Ernie Clement, Leo Jimenez, Nathan Lucas, Eduardo Escobar, Daniel Vogelbach.
Daniel Vogelbach, as we discussed, probably one of them.
All right, so we'll put him on. So we'll put him in the lefty bench bat conversation, or as the lefty off the bench.
Then, based on Shai's reporting, it sure sounds like Eduardo Escobar, against both of our better judgments, sure seems like he is going to be one of those guys, which gets you to 12. And now you're looking at Clement, Schneider, Espinal.
So I want to have this conversation because Davis Schneider, how is he in a battle for a roster spot after what he did last year? Like, does he not deserve, after what he did, a shot at being your primary second baseman?
It's a little nonsensical. I think that the fear is the 30% or so K rate that he obviously had. Obviously walked at an exceptional clip. And the other thing is that the power probably does not sustain. But also I don't really see why he wouldn't be penciled in. I don't see why you've given Vogelbach and Escobar. I don't see why they've leapt over that group.
Like to me, when I look at it, like I understand the fears about Schneider, but also like he was so good for your team.
We did everything right.
I just don't understand how he wouldn't deserve a spot on the opening day roster.
The ability to pull the ball, the really good pitch selection, for his skill set in terms of his raw outputs, he makes up for it in every manner possible, just in terms of just his approach to the plate, right? He's a very prototypical modern, and when I say modern, I really mean like cutting edge almost type of hitter. He's worried about exit velos, but he's worried about pulling the ball. He's worried about hitting stuff over the heart of the plate.
Yeah, I mean, I also look at his AAA numbers last year, and like he only had a 21.9% K rate, right? So, are you worried that that K rate is going to go up from his major league stint? Like it was 30 and a half in 141 plate appearances. So, is like to me, I feel like it's more he had never struck out while he had in like pretty small samples in 2021. But outside of that, he had never struck out above 30% at any stop in the minors. So to me, the more at bats that he gets in the majors, like that's likely to go down, right?
Well, I think it's exactly that. Is his best quality is his pitch recognition, and he struck out looking at a significant clip last year,
On pitches
especially.
outside of the zone.
Exactly. So to me, that would seem to indicate that he's probably due for some positive regression in that kind of area. And also, you would figure, obviously, he's old for a prospect, but you walked at a good clip, and you would figure that there's a good chance that continues to regress positively. Maybe not regress, but it figures to maybe advance in some capacity in a positive direction. Now, he walked a really, really high clip, if I recall correctly. It was what was it? It was something
Uh
in the teens, right?
15, 15.
15%.
14.9.
He's gonna, I mean, that's a elite walk rate, right? So if he can sustain that, that's maybe a different question. But if he does, then I don't see why he isn't a middle of the order guy for you every day potentially.
Yeah. I just don't get like if we're building out the Blue Jays roster, how he ends up in like the 13th man conversation. You know, it's
It,
crazy to me.
it's a little
So
nonsensical.
I also like the way that I look at the roster, like I don't think Eduardo Escobar is an opening day roster. I know Shy said that like he had an assurance of making the roster, but to me it's just like Schneider should be on, and then your your 13th man spot is between Espinal and Escobar, right? And like I I, I don't know. It's tough, but
I mean, to me, as much as I've been saying that I don't have any faith in him, I mean, I could totally see a universe where Escobar hits better than Espinal. So maybe if it's just for bat purposes, then sure, I could see that. But then what's the point of bringing in Vogelbach, who is quite literally for bat only purposes?
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, do you like just when I think about like the whole Escobar thing, obviously like I think Vogelback is like the bat, right? So Escobar to me is like a little bit of extra competition, but when it comes down to making that final roster, um and Espinal or a Clement makes a little bit more sense to me as
Yeah,
far
for
as like
sure.
having like IKF, yeah, he played short, he can be your backup shortstop, but I think having like IKF or sorry, Clement or Espinal makes a little bit more sense, especially like off the bench. We're looking at it right now. Espinal is not going to be a pinch runner. Escobar is not going to be a pinch runner. Schneider, Biggio aren't going to be pinch runners. Vogelbach sure as hell not going to be a pinch runner. Jansen or Kirk aren't going to be a pinch runner. So I think that Clement like just makes a ton of sense for the roster. And I know like kind of the bad stuff like isn't going to sustain from what he did last year, but I still think that like he's your best defensive shortstop on your roster. He's a good runner. Like he's a really good bench piece. He can play either middle infield spot. He can play left field. He did in AAA. I just feel like he makes the most sense as like a 13th guy over Espinal or over Escobar. And I know that like limits what you're doing with the bat, but are the bat like how much of a difference is there between Escobar, Espinal, and Clement at the plate?
It's so fractional, if it even is fractional. And then at that point, you're looking at the glove, at which point it's Clement. But I just don't know if they believe in Clement. I think it's just as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's it's I don't know. The way that I build the
I
roster is a little
will
bit
I
different
will
from them.
well I will add this. It's nice to be, first of all, it's nice to be chatting roster construction once again. Very
Yes.
nice that baseball's back. But it's nice also that you're looking at the fringes of your roster instead of worrying about the starting and
Yeah.
the core. To be fair, buyer beware with this core as it stands. Justin Turner as your offseason headliner is not what you want to see always. But I think that to that point, you're still doing okay if it's between Espinal and Clement and Escobar.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Any chance Martinez, Barger, Horwitz do have like a really solid spring and earn a way onto the roster?
It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like that question was asked, and if I recall correctly, Ross Sackett said something to the effect of no,
Yeah. Yeah.
which sucks because I think it'd be really fun to see Barger, especially
Yeah.
given a shot at third base, and it just doesn't sound like he's going to get it.
I've said this before, but I do agree kind of with the philosophy of like prospects need to force your hand, right? So I don't think that they're forcing your hand in spring training. I think that's probably more of a AAA thing. So if Elvis and Barger start off insanely hot in AAA and force your hand, like then I'm fine with it, right? I will say though, last year, Clement, Schneider performed well enough to force the Blue Jays' hands, and they didn't
And they
make
didn't.
and they didn't do it. So it's interesting. It'll be something to watch, but I'm okay with them starting in AAA and kind of giving these spots to some of these other guys.
Yeah, and you figure that they'll still get their cracks.
Yeah,
It just might come as the weather warms up.
yeah, for sure. All right, let's lock in a final 13. So we got Kirk, Jansen, Vladdy, Cavan, IKF, Bo, Spring. Are we gonna do what we think is gonna happen or what we want or what we would do?
Let's go with what we think.
What we think? Okay. So Kirk, Jansen, Vlad, Biggio, IKF, Bo, Springer, Kiermaier, Varsho, Vogelbach. So that is 10. So we have three spots for Ernie Clement, Santiago Espinal, Davis Schneider, and Eduardo Escobar.
Who gets cut?
Did I do my math wrong again? Hold on.
This segment of the Blue Jays is brought to you by the letter A for addition.
All right. So we've got two roster spots for Eduardo Escobar, Davis Schneider, Santiago Espinal, Ernie Clement.
I think David Schneider's on the team. I think as much as they've clearly pushed him to the fringes, I think David Schneider's on this team.
I
And
agree.
now you've got one spot for Clement, Santiago Espinal, Eduardo
Eduardo
Escobar.
Escobar.
I think what I want and what the Blue Jays are going to do very, very wildly. And I think that it's the same with you. But it sure sounds like Eduardo Escobar has made the team despite a zero redeeming qualities as a hitter. And it sure seems like Ernie Clement is going to end up elsewhere when he's picked up off waivers. And Santiago Espinal might end up elsewhere too if a trade is made. So I'm thinking Escobar probably gets that nod, but if I were them, I'd probably sit right in the middle and I go Espinal.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think if today Eduardo Escobar probably sneaks into that spot just based on giving a little bit more with the bat. Um, However, I'm gonna say this. My hot take around this is that the player who occupies this spot on the roster is not currently on the roster.
Interesting take. Interesting take. I could see it, but I think
I
it'd be
I,
very interesting to see who exactly that could be.
I think there probably is a trade to come. I think it makes the most sense, and it might be something in a couple weeks from now. But as it's currently constructed, I'll say Escobar. As far as like as what I think it'll be, I think there is a trade to come. All right, so finalizing bird's eye view opening day final 13 position players. Alejandro Kirk, Danny Jansen, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Kevin Biggio, Davis Schneider, IKF, Bo Bichette, George Springer, Kevin Kiermaier, Dalton Varsho, Justin Turner, Daniel Vogelbach, and Eduardo Escobar.
Good
Hell of
team.
a, I'd say that's a around a 90 win team.
That team sure does whelm me.
uh um eh, any other players that you're interested by? I mean, I'll I don't want to list off all of the non-roster invites. We kind of did a little bit of it last week, but I'm just gonna like some names that I'm intrigued by as guys to watch during camp. Rafael Lantigua, I think he'll be interesting. Obviously, he was a minor league free agent. They brought him back after he was very strong. A lot of the players like kind of bump him up or hype him up. So interesting name to watch there. Connor Cook,
Noted slam dunk champion,
noted.
allegedly.
Apparently, he's got hops, so he also strikes out a lot of dudes. So
An athlete.
he's a guy to watch for sure. Paul Majani, Will Robertson, Alan Roden, um, Ricky Tiedemann, as a non-roster invite.
Self-evident.
We didn't even talk about him as a potential on the pitching staff guy, but I think it's pretty clear that he would need to do some crazy stuff to open the camp with the big league team.
Yeah, it would be pretty unthinkable.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to just about do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you follow, you subscribe, you like on YouTube. We're at the Bird's Eye View pod. Subscribe to our Substack there. We'll be doing some writing in the next coming weeks, hopefully. And you can follow us all on Twitter. The pod is at BEV_pod. Jori is at J Negin-Shecter. And I am at Worden_Zach. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.